Public hearings are also a chance for the American people to watch us, their elected officials. Americans should be able to see their government in action. They should know whether we're acting on their behalf and whether we're keeping their interests, not partisan politics, at the forefront of everything. I must say that's why it's important this committee hold public hearings on the next nominee to the Supreme Court. Public hearings. The Senate's constitutional duty to provide advice and consent on Supreme Court nominees falls to this committee to initiate. I mention that because for 100 years since we've had this committee, we've done that in public hearings. However, for the next nominee to the Supreme Court, we've yet to hold a single public committee meeting to discuss how we're going to fulfill that constitutional duty. I know the Republican committee members met behind closed doors to unilaterally decide, without any input from Democrats, decided this committee and the Senate as a whole will simply refuse to consider a Supreme Court nominee this year, even assuming, as I'm sure he will, that the president fulfills his constitutional duty to nominate the Supreme Court justice, something that's spelled out very clearly in the Constitution. And of course, we've taken an oath of office under God to uphold the Constitution, which includes advising and consenting to that nominee. But I think when we have a unilateral decision by some behind closed doors, it's a dereliction of our constitutional duty. More importantly, though, it denies the American people the chance to participate in a public discussion of the nominee. Now, we talk about the Justice Department's responsibility to keep Americans safe. We should remember that if the Senate Republicans refuse to consider the next Supreme Court nominee, that's going to make the goal harder for the Justice Department. A Republican shutdown of any confirmation process for a Supreme Court nominee means the court will be missing a justice for probably a year and a half anyway. As several former U.S. attorneys from Ohio and Washington State and California and Virginia recently wrote, quote, "For federal prosecutors, agents, and criminal investigations, a year is a lifetime. We've seen real threats, whether it's the heroin epidemic or the threat of ISIS recruitment, facing the people in our communities every day. While law enforcement stands ready to protect the public from these threats, they need to know the rules of the road," close quote. These former law enforcement officials explained that with the Supreme Court unable to function as the final arbiter of our nation's laws for more than a year, it's going to be a real challenge to our law enforcement community. Now, the Senate's consideration of the next Supreme Court nominee shouldn't be a question of politics or electoral math. It should be about that solemn oath we all took as senators to uphold the Constitution. And we say, "So help me God." That's why the American people should expect to see this committee convening this spring to hold public hearings to consider the next nominee to the nation's highest court. The Justice Department, through its Solicitor General, represents the American people every week before the Supreme Court. So our hearing today is on the Justice Department, but what looms large on the horizon is whether this committee will do its job to fairly consider the next nominee to the Supreme Court. I hope we will do our job for the good of this country, for our entire justice system. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.